I'm quite a fan of opera. The game, that is. Operas in general I know nothing about. The closest thing I've ever seen to an opera would be Metallica and the Symphony on DVD. But for some reason this game was intriguing enough for me to go out and hunt down a copy. Opera is a strategic game for 2 to 4 players, recommended for ages 12 plus, and has an approximate playtime of 90 to 120 minutes. The game takes place during the time opera took over Europe. Players are leading members of aristocratic families who dedicate themselves to encourage the finer taste of opera. Players will have to enlist the help from employees and notable personalities to help promote world-renowned composers and their operas by putting on shows in various cities across Europe. The player at the end of the game with the most victory points will be the winner. You'll be able to get victory points in a number of ways, which I'll get into later. Most of the victory points will be dependent on the fame of the composers. Composer's fame will change throughout the game, depending on how popular his music is. So let's have a brief overview of how the game is played, but first of all, mi dispiace, io non parlo bene l'italiano. Let's have a look at the game.
Let's have a look at the board. We have the round track, the victory point path, the cities in which players will organise operas, the palazzo or palace, the budget track, the composers and their current available music pieces, the player's current hall with their house composer, the player's ducats behind a screen, and the personalities that players will have the option of choosing. At the beginning of the game, players only have access to Venezia, Wien and Berlin. Paris and London will become available in later rounds as opera's popularity spreads across Europe, and Milano again will become available later in the piece. There are 4 phases of play: the budget phase, the action phase, the income phase, and the end phase. In the budget phase, players put money from their personal collection in their hands and reveal simultaneously, each bidding an amount. They will then move their budget piece up the amount bid, so red goes first, then blue, then yellow. The budget phase is very important as it determines turn order. Turn order will go from highest to lowest, left to right, so red, blue, yellow. Because red is first, red can now choose one of the personality cards to start off the action phase. Let's have a look at the personality cards. There are 2 groups, the characters and employees. When a player chooses an employee, he'll get to execute the employee's action for a fee from his budget. An employee also allows other players to play along. They too will get the opportunity to execute the employee's action again for a fee. It's worth mentioning again that the fee is paid from the budget and not the player's cash. And remember, the budget track determines turn order. Here's an example. Let's say red selects an employee and pays a fee of 2 to execute the employee's action. Red then turns his budget counter over to show that he has performed an action with this employee. Yellow and blue choose to play along. They pay the play along fee noted on the personality card of 1. It's now time to select the next personality. Red is still highest on the turn order and will choose again. So you can now see the importance of the budget phase and whether playing along is a good idea because it may push you up or down in the turn order. Players will continue selecting roles according to the turn order until each player ends his performance by choosing to pass. So let's have a look at the employees and their abilities if hired. The impresario will be able to buy 2 music pieces for a cost of the composer's current fame. So here Mozart's music would currently cost 6 ducats per piece, Verdi 5, and so on. The impresario will also enable players to rearrange their music pieces in their halls. The architetto can buy up to 2 building parts for 2 ducats per piece, and he will receive 2 victory points per building piece purchased. The signora, who will enable players to sell 1 music piece of previously purchased music to the palazzo or palace for 2 times the composer's current fame in ducats or 1 times the composer's fame in victory points. So that's the employees. Let's have a look at the 3 characters. Characters are easily identifiable as characters are the ones with the pawns. A player who selects a character will get to execute the character's action, again for a fee to his budget. But other players don't get the chance to play along. So, the maestro will enable a player to move the green pawn to a city. In the income phase, this city will give double income. The cortico enables you to move the black pawn to a city and raise or lower a composer's fame currently performing in that city. The esperto will move the purple pawn to a city and all operas performed in this city will yield points. Each music piece a player has there will gather as many points as the composer's current fame. Now let's move on to the 3rd phase, the income phase. players will now get income for each opera performed in their halls. The more operas, the more income the players will receive. Remember, the maestro will double income for operas in the city he is visiting. It's now time for the end phase. This sees the fame of the composers change. The composer who has the most operas being performed in the players' halls will move up the fame ladder. So let's say Red at some point used the impresario to purchase a piece of music from Verdi. Verdi now has the most operas being performed in the combined players' halls, because of course Blue and Yellow have no purchased music. So Verdi's fame will increase, and he moves up to take the top spot from Mozart. Unsold music is now discarded and new music comes out. If the palazzo is full, it is emptied and the round marker is moved forward. Opera is played over 9 rounds divided into 3 episodes. The episodes are Baroque, Classicism and Romanticism, and at the end of each episode this triggers a counting round, where players will score victory points for operas being performed in their main halls. The player receives victory points of the composer's current fame. That concludes the brief overview of opera, so let's have a look at a few things that stood out to me whilst playing the game. The rulebook. The rulebook is nicely laid out and quite easy to reference to. There is the odd wording in there that seemed to leave me with no firm directive though. However, the game's designer and co-designer are quite active in the opera forums on BoardGameGeek, answering players' questions and supporting the game. That's something I always feel is great to have, and it makes me feel a bit more secure about my purchase, as I know there is little chance of me getting a broken game. Components. The artwork is just beautiful, the cards are quite thick, and overall I found the components great. The composers have a bit of history printed on them, which to me was fascinating, not knowing much about operas. There is some debate over whether Beethoven should have been included in this game, and I agree. He after all only composed 1 opera. But that's not why they should have left him out. He also made 5 terrible movies! No, but seriously, I enjoyed reading the cards because I knew little of the composer's history. The screens are the only component I'd have liked to have seen a bit thicker, but they still obviously function perfectly as is.
Now, opera is a strategic game, but one where you're going to have to take a lot into consideration to be able to execute your strategy effectively. And what I mean is there is a lot of competition, a lot of choices to make, and some serious ways that you can mess with your opponent's strategy. I can imagine there may be a few people who may not enjoy this more aggressive interaction in the strategy game, but I consider it one of the game's biggest assets. Opera really shows the cutthroat world of show business through its mechanics. A lot of the mechanics just also make a lot of sense too. I often found myself thinking how well thought out the game was. Like for example, the fame of the composers being dependent on how many operas he is performing. That makes a lot of sense. A composer is more exposed to the public, people are enjoying his music, and the demand of the composer's music increases as a result. And of course, the players are going to want to aim to give the public what they want. And throughout the game there is a number of these mechanics that just stood out as being particularly well suited to the theme of the game. And there were no mechanics that I felt were a bit out of place or broke up gameplay in a bad way. The game runs very smoothly. Now, in regards to turn order and the budget track, I was concerned of downtime as a result of a player being able to take multiple turns in a row. But there is a limit on how many roles one player can select, and the play-along feature brought downtime to a minimum, as you often have choices to make in your opponent's turn, which was really great. Now, I don't know much about classical music or operas, as I mentioned, but I still really enjoyed this game, and I don't think it matters at all if you're a fan of classical music, because it is a game with the theme of opera, but more of a focus on the business side of things. But in saying that, if you were a fan of classical music, the enjoyment level, I'm sure, would be increased even more. Replay value, at the moment, it's still early days. There are a lot of people I'd like to introduce to this game. The fact that I enjoy the game 2-player will certainly lead to this game getting played often. We've found opera to be quite a balanced game. The importance of managing your income and budget is the key to not falling behind, and it must be mentioned to new players that it's not always a great idea to invest a lot of money into the budget track. The screens that hide the player's cash also contribute to the balance of things, as a player won't know how much you can afford to bid in the budget phase or what you might be limited to purchasing. I enjoyed this game a lot. I picked it up for $55 Australian, which is somewhat unusually cheap in this country for a game of this depth, style and quality. But it just means that I'm going to get my money's worth a lot quicker, and I'm happy with that. Thanks for joining me on another episode of Castelli Reviews, and I hope to see you all again soon.